Hola, mi gente! I hope you're doing well, and I hope that you had a great Easter weekend. As you know, mi gente, Pope Francis died yesterday, at around 7:35 Rome time. And I thought, mi gente, that it was necessary to talk about him. I'm not really a religious person. I was baptized a Catholic. I think I went one when I was 1 year old. I don't know. Anyway, my parents were Catholic, but do I consider myself a Catholic? No. And I have this thing that I share with Jean-François Bayard. I believe that if God exists, religions are unnecessary and they don't really exist. So yes, but I thought that it was indispensable to talk about Pope Francis because I was talking to a friend about the next few days and the succession, and she was saying, "I hope we get an African Pope." And I said to her, "There's no need for an African Pope. What is needed is a young Pope Francis." But that's the opinion of somebody who is not really an expert on those matters. The opinion of somebody who's not even longer a Catholic. So it's an opinion of somebody who just considers herself to be somewhat informed on those matters. But my opinion on the subject is that the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church doesn't need an African Pope. The Catholic Church needs a young Pope Francis, somebody who will just continue what he started. These processes that would make it possible for the Catholic Church to recognize its African roots. That is all is necessary. We don't need an African figurehead to push the Catholic Church back to this conservative um, European, whatever, where social matters don't really matter, where social matters are secondary to identity, to the cultural wars, where Africans and non-Europeans are just there to make sure that uh, Christianity and Catholicism remain powerful, but where their own culture, their own beliefs locally, which are a part of them, which are important locally, which has mingled, which has become mixed with Catholicism, with Christianity for um, centuries now, or remains on the margins. African Christianity, African Catholicism is a thing, and it has existed for centuries now, and yet it is still considered to be exotic, on the margin, it's not really, is it legitimate? Um, the greatest thing that Pope Francis did was to start to move the needle away from the European centric, even the Western centric mattress of Catholicism by showing that no, the South matters. And it's not something, it's an essential part. It may even become the most important part of Christianity and Catholicism. You can't just look at it and say, yeah, we have to integrate them. We have to, it's a little bit like diversity in America. Yeah, but, they have to assimilate, you know, that, notion of assimilation, that to me is problematic. I was listening to Glenn Lowry. I keep talking to you about Glenn Lowry. And Glenn Lowry was on something else, that assimilation was the way of the future. And on that, I disagree strongly with Glenn Lowry. I think that people come with their own stuff and they're not going to become the same. Sameness is not the future. It is not the future in America. It's not the future in Western countries. It's not even the future in African countries. It's not the future in the Catholic Church. There are differences. There are different smell to Catholicism. You know, Catholicism in Spain is not really the same as Catholicism in Germany. Catholicism in Cameroon is not really the same as Catholicism, I don't know, in South Africa. There's something different there. And I think it has to be acknowledged. And yes, in Africa, there's something there. And Catholics in Africa take their religion very, very seriously. They know the teachings, and they also know their own cultures, and they are not giving up one for the other. Those two have mixed and have become something that is legitimate and that has to be recognized by the church. So, by starting to talk about priests, whether they should be married or not, about women, about homosexuality, even though that's a very, very controversial issue in Africa. Not only in Africa, but mostly in Africa. It has other, connotations. By moving the needle on those type of issues, by starting the conversation, Pope Francis did something awesome. So when I was reading the Wall Street Journal, editorial said that he was the champion of the poor, but he supported ideas that kept them poor. And I was thinking, for the Wall Street Journal, to say that the journal that is supporting Trump, Murdoch, who is like a proponent of national liberalism, Johnson has mixed those two terms, nationalism and liberalism, nationalism for the poor and liberalism for the rich. And the Wall Street Journal is the epitome of that, of a newspaper that is supporting that type of idea, who believes that liberalism is the way to go. But to the poor, you're going to sell identity stuff. No diversity, culture for the rich. We just have to sell to the poor the idea that they may one day become Rupert Murdoch. They may one day become Rupert Murdoch. And if you don't, then you're not really with them. And I was thinking, that's rich from the Wall Street Journal to basically say that, okay, Pope Francis wanted the church to be poor, he wanted to keep the poor poor. I was thinking, okay, when has the Wall Street Journal ever really um, advocated for the poor? And to them, what is the solution? Liberalism, saying, okay, may the best win. Let's just, it's the rule of the jungle. It's the Hobbesian thing where, might, makes right, especially in the economy, as open as possible, no rules, no equality, that the government doesn't have to be involved. There doesn't need to be any adjustment. There doesn't need any type of regulation or bad, and for the Pope to talk about the excess of liberalism, to talk about a society that is just consuming, to talk about the fact that at some point the rich countries have to think about not, not owning so much for the poor countries to have something. And the Wall Street Journal just says, poor. He wants the church to be poor and to keep the poor poor, and he supports ideas that keep the poor poor. And I'm thinking, wow. So, niente, to me, Pope Francis did what an African pope, especially at this moment, would never be allowed to do, which is to try to challenge the status quo, to try. He became pope at 76 years old. That's old. He had 12 years. Very, very short. But what he started by saying stuff like, who am I to judge when it came to questions of, of homosexuality and everything else? By going to places where, you know, popes usually don't go, supporting migrants, talking about the environment, and refusing the easy road, the popular road. It would have been easier for him to just stand with the Trumps of the world, to just say, okay, let's be conservative. It's just your beliefs that matter. Your actions are not really that important. Being a good Catholic is to just believe that abortion is wrong, that homosexuality is wrong. Nothing else matters. Pope Francis reminded the world that the social question is important and that it's not an identity that is at the center of the world struggle. Is those type of question, the human question, the dignity question, and yeah, the diversity question, because you are not, the Catholic Church is not going to assimilate all those Africans, Catholic out there, and ask them to become, to believe the same way as Catholics in Spain, in France, in Germany do. It's never going to happen. You know, Catholics in Africa are never, never, ever, ever going to be like Catholics in Europe or in America. They're not. And for the church to try to assimilate, to use Glenn Lowry's word, it's not going to work. Even in Latin America, it's different. And that's that was a plus, a huge plus for the church that Pope Francis came from Argentina. It made him aware of those type of issues that I think that Pope Benedict XVI wasn't, and that even John Paul II wasn't aware of. He had that touch, that sensibility, where he got the sensitivity of the South, of people who were different and who understood that if the Catholic Church was only trying to remain Western and thinking that it was the only way for itself to be pure, and other Catholics were considered to be second class Catholics. Like it was never going to work. You know, I think that by at least um, moving the needle, looking at those matters, being open to them, he did a great service to the church. So I was listening to this French politician saying that Pope Francis was a woke pope. And I was like, yeah, thank God. The Catholic Church needed a woke pope and still needs a woke pope. Not the pope that's going to be an extremist, but say, yes, there are matters here that are in great needs of our attention. Africa, Latin America, other countries, other continents besides America and Europe. And they have their own traditions. They have their own history with Christianity, with Catholicism. And we have to think about that and we have to welcome them with open arms instead of just saying, yeah, it is up to us to tell you how you get in. This is our religion. We are the one who decide how. We decide when we open the door. We decide when we close it. We decide who's legitimate. We decide who becomes the cardinal. We decide who becomes the pope. That's the issue. And I think that Pope Francis opened the door. And because he did, miente, I'm saying Santo Subito. Yeah, great pope. To me, he was a great pope. Great pope for the time. Great Pope Francis said, no, no. He said just our religion. It's also their religion. And what they feel, what they think, their history, their culture also matter. We're going to have to find a way to bring everybody together and to stop fighting those wars, cultural wars about, yeah, who's on top, whatever, 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 and put the church at the center of the village instead of fighting all of those wars that the Wall Street Journal loves. So great woke pope, great woke pope. Yeah, Niente, great woke pope. Sometimes woke is great. Woke can be great. And Pope Francis shows it. Woke can be great. And he was a great woke pope. So may he rest in peace, and let's hope his successor is a young Pope Francis. We don't need an African Pope. We just need a young Pope Francis. That's it. All the Catholic Church needs is a young Pope Francis. That's it. A young Pope Francis. He doesn't have to be black. He doesn't have to be African. He just has to be a young Pope Francis. What he looks like doesn't matter. Okay, mi gente, see you Thursday for another episode. And if you haven't already done so, subscribe to my YouTube channel.